Let's go.
Our next panel right now, and they'll probably all run for office right after this, just FYI. Our next panel is actually called Throw Out Your Trace Paper. Designing a building takes teams of people across multiple disciplines working on dozens of separate tasks, as many of you know. As other industries evolve and transform by disrupting norms, how can architecture, engineering, and construction do the same? This next session will illustrate how forward thinkers are reimagining the old way of doing things by integrating technology to optimize partnerships and processes. Our moderator for this panel is Chris Colasanti from JBB, an MEP design engineering firm based in New York City. So please welcome Chris, a bunch of other Chris's, and Haley to the stage.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. So yeah, we laughed about putting the panel together with the three Chris's and the Haleys. We like to think Haley has a C in there, okay, but it's silent. So anyway, thank you guys for having us. Again, my name's Chris. I'm with JB&B, an MEP design engineering firm in New York City. We are the folks that do the design of the infrastructure systems for buildings. The mechanical systems, the HVAC, the plumbing, the fire protection, all the technology, all the stuff that goes into a building that makes it function and breathe. Not the architecture, not the structure, but everything else. And on my first day of work at JB&B, 18 years ago, I was handed the state-of-the-art design tool of the day. I stashed it up here. A piece of trace paper. This trace paper, some pencils and some markers, felt tip markers, were the tools we used. We ran our calculations on the trace paper, hand drawing them. We transposed our drawings from architectural backgrounds onto other sheets. This trace paper actually formed, our record keeping. We would do our designs on trace. They would go in a folder and they would stay there. I still have a whole stack of them that I can't get rid of because they're, I like to think they're beautiful. But anyway, things have changed significantly and they're going to continue to change. And so today we have three speakers to talk about how they see things changing in the design space in the future. First up is going to be Haley Nyman. She's a mechanical director at Thrux. She'll tell you about her software tool. Followed by Christian Giordano, president at Mancini Duffy Architects in New York City. And then Chris Mayer from Suffolk Construction. So we'll get right into it. After the three talks, they're going to do a short little presentation. If we have time for Q&A, we'll do some Q&A. All right, Haley, you want to go ahead?
All right. Thanks, Chris. Can I grab the slide? Thank you. All right. So like Chris mentioned, I'm running the mechanical development at Thrux, and I previously worked as an HVAC engineer for JB&B. So for those of you who aren't familiar with HVAC, I'll give you some background in how we document our final designs. So you're looking at a little blurry, but a typical flow diagram of a mechanical water system for a building. And in this case, this drawing was included on page 134 of a giant 200-page document set. And you'll see called out by this square at the top is a piece of equipment called a cooling tower. There's some information and notes and symbols about that cooling tower. On page 65 of that same 200-page document set, you'll see, again, that very same piece of equipment, that same cooling tower, this time with different information. On page 195 of that same 200-page document set, you'll again see that same piece of equipment, this time with sizing information and model numbers. And if that wasn't enough places, we also include, in this case, maybe a 300-page specification book with some very dense, very hard to read legal language, giving you more information about the piece of equipment. And that's just how we document our final designs. But what about how we put these designs together in the first place? Similar to Chris's experience, on my first day as an engineer, I was handed this tool. It's called a ductulator, for those of you who don't know. And the way it works is you can't really see it, but you spin part of it. So you spin a wheel, and you line up some design parameters up in the blue and in the red. And based on the rotation of the wheel, you get some potential duct sizes down here. Kind of ridiculous, but this is just one example of the tools that we're still using to design MEP projects. So what's happening is we're playing a game of telephone. An engineer dreams up a design in their head. they take that design and they input it into calculation tools, like that ductulator. They take the outputs from those tools, and a human is tasked with translating those outputs, oh no, okay, there we go, into a 3D BIM model, losing some information as they do so. From that 3D BIM model, we flatten it into 2D document sets and add more information, warping and distorting the data. And from there, we translate it off to an owner or contractor who's tasked with interpreting those document sets. And by the end of the process, we've pretty much distorted and warped the original design intent. So what are we doing about it? At Thrux, we're building an actual funnel for design information, we call it. So the second the design leaves an engineer's brain and it enters into that first step, those calculation tools, it's actually translated into real data. So the design decisions are captured in data form. And as that design travels through further calculation, through coordination with other trades, maybe through documentation, and is even translated into an expected cost, that data is always warped off to a common source of information. So you're never losing detail through that telephone. And this Thrux funnel leads right into BIM tools, because we know that really accurate and detailed BIM models are the future of this industry, but we also know that the current BIM tools are just not built for designers. And from BIM, this data can be leveraged by any other party or software platform. So let's see an example of using Thrux on a real project. Oh. I may not be able to run this video, but you'll just have to believe me, I guess. You're looking at an electrical distribution system. That will go back. You're looking at an electrical distribution system. If you go down to the bottom of the screen and run the video. On the left, it will pop up if you come a little bit over. All right, maybe not. All right, so we have an electrical distribution system modeled in Thrux, designed completely in this platform. And you'll see on the right side of your screen an order of magnitude cost estimate associated with that data. So what the video does is we go in and we select a piece of equipment and we make a change to it. We move it up 2 stories. And as we do so, the design is changed, the calculations are changed, and this order of magnitude price goes up a certain number to reflect the change, leveraging that common source of information to give you real-time design information. So, oh, it's a little blurry. What does this mean for the future of our industry? So right now, we're kind of working with this process. An owner wants to make a change. They want to relocate some equipment. They send that direction off to their design team, who spends some period of time re-going through their calculations, redocumenting that design. They send that off to a contractor who spends another long period of time interpreting those documents and coming up with the price delta. And then collectively, they send that back to an owner for review, who oftentimes can say, oh, I didn't realize it's actually too expensive. I don't want to make this change. And the cycle repeats indefinitely, with all of that time and money wasted. So with use of better tools, we can actually, like Thrux, we can actually get the owner, the designers, the contractors in a room together, make changes, instantly understand the impacts, and make real decisions. And when we can do that, we can scheme through many more design options than were ever possible, leading to real optimization, whether it's for cost or efficiency, which is very exciting for the industry.
I'll stand in the same spot. I'm Christian Giordano. I'm president, owner of Mancini Duffy. We are a 100-person architecture firm based out of New York City. We do have a small startup called Tool X, which you're seeing that little logo there. But essentially what I want to talk to you about is very similar, sort of this process, right? So architects are using the same tools to communicate their designs as they did 200 years ago. It's all the same stuff. And so here's some images of some architecture firms, historic photos there, people at their drafting desks. I love this one, a giant thing on the floor that a bunch of architects are drawing on. A little bit more modern, frankly, not that long ago. That's how I started. And then into the computer graphics world, where again, while this looks a little bit more advanced, you're really just imitating the same thing. It's just lines on a paper illustrating the same thing over and over again. A little bit more advanced. And to our current office today, which even though we're doing BIM modeling, the process is really just mimicking the same thing over and over again. So our goal, for architects, productivity has not gone up at all, and the technology has gone through the roof in every other industry, and we have a lot of technology, we just don't use it in our process. So really what's going to happen is changing that process and the way that we do things and immersing our clients in the process is really going to be what gives us our exponential change. So from the drawing and representation of lines to an illustrative drawing of how something comes together into the actual using the 3D that we're building to communicate. So these are an example of all of the different programs that we use. And what we've done at Mancini Duffy is written software that connects them all, that makes all of these softwares work together and communicate. And this all kind of comes through in our software called Tool X. And hopefully this goes. A little choppy, good. So this is the beginnings of our process here. And what you're seeing is this is Pier 17 for Howard Hughes Company down in Lower Manhattan, where my firm, we're designing all of the interior spaces. And the client is able to move through their model, through their actual construction documents. So you're not looking at a fake representation. You're actually looking, because of the way we've connected the softwares, you're looking at the actual construction documents in an illustrated form. Using some scripting here, we're able to then predetermine building code, occupancies. So as we're working with the client, we bring them into this process, into our room, and we start working with them immediately. In this case, this was a Jean-Georges restaurant. And John George himself wants to know, how big can I get that kitchen? How many people can fit in there? How many tables can I sit? Before I sign this lease, I need to know how I can get all this stuff in there. And so we're working in tandem with everyone in the room, in our office, and we're communicating all of this. By using the different scripting languages, we're able to give them real-time feedback and then connect that back into the VR model, which they then put the headset on and they move on from there. So this thing then begins to build things that the infrastructure that it needs. So it's got the bathrooms, it's got the toilets, the proper things. It's not finished. It's a sketch essentially by the time it's all said and done, but it gives it catapults us into the realm of a realistic design. And so now when John George puts on the headset and he starts looking around in that same session and he looks at his final layout of his furniture, he can start making changes in there. And you can see the connections between the two. And John George is moving tables around and he's adding bars and things to things. And he's actually seeing what it looks like. Let's see if it goes to the next one. So I'm just going to kind of skip that part. This is the example of the lab in our office of where this all goes down, a fully immersive environment. This is the tool. So when you're in our process here and the user looks down, they see what we call a tool belt. And there are essential tools that both the client and we need to communicate the design. So they can change materials, they can move throughout the model, they can look at the floor plan, measure things, and go from there. So this is an example of actually another restaurateur. This is a guy by the name of Jan DeForte, Boqueria Restaurants. He's the owner and chef. And we do all his restaurants. We've done about 10 of them now. There's actually one that is planned for Atlanta. He's really looking to scale his business. And he manipulates everything in this environment. This is our first meeting with him, where we've pre-built everything into the 3D model. He's able to move chairs. He's able to work the kitchen. He's able to say, no, this is not how I want the beverage. This is how, when he goes into the back, how he's going to change and clean the dishware and things like that. Another quick example, this is Rutgers University. They're planning, this is the professors that are working in a new technology building that we're doing for them. So again, day one, immersed in the environment, able to see what it's going to look like and start making real informed decisions. So for us, what's next, and you'll hear this in a little bit, and we've touched on it a little bit, is really how do we get from flattening our drawings, as Haley said. I mean, we put all this information. How do we get from flattening our drawings to actually delivering the model down the road? There's a lot of detail that has to go into this, and I will tell you that me as an architect with 20 years of experience, I don't really know how to build things, and I know that's shocking to people. But we do representations of how to build things, and it's very, very different. So the entire process truly has to change in order to realistically make this sort of a seamless transition. So things like 3D printing that we talked about and projection mapping, all of these ways of communicating an actual design into the final version. So thank you.
There we go. How have your clients been reacting to that process? I mean, it's completely different than what we're used to.
Yeah.
It usually takes weeks, if not months, to get to a point where you can actually show something to a client that they can respond to. So I'm just curious, like, how's that working?
So I would say that we've done about 30 clients or so in this process now, and it's been an evolution over the last really year and a half. Those that have been in the process, I can tell you the head of Verizon has said, I'll never do a traditional design process ever again. I'll never sit there and wait 2 weeks before I get my next iteration, because what they realize is that we can do an entire month's worth of work in a couple hours, realistically, with the right planning and the right setup for all this sort of stuff. So those that have taken the leap of faith, in a sense, they're all in for it, for sure.
Thank you. Sure. Thank you, Christian.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Chris Mayer, and I'm the Chief Innovation Officer at Suffolk. Been there about 4.5 years. Didn't start in construction, started in technology, and then in media for about 30 years. And so my perspective on this is, having looked at technology, first of all, driving change, and then an industry that has gone through a significant amount of change and had to adapt. And so looking at this space and looking kind of across the value chain is where I think there's a huge amount of opportunity, because there has been in all of these other industries. And I think what you're getting a sense of here is that the more the three disciplines here work together, the better the outcomes are going to be across for the owners in terms of creating value. And so that's really my message here, is really the technology. We don't have too little technology. What we need is to focus on, if you think about the three things that drive change, is people, process, and technology all coming together. We have to be focusing on the process and ultimately on the people. And so the 3D model enables all sorts of different output. And again, coming from the media space, we like to talk about being medium output agnostic. So if you look at where the media struggled as an industry, it was when we took what we originally wrote for print and just pushed it online, sort of that shovelware approach to representing information instead of figuring out why would people be consuming it in that medium. So 2D is perfectly valid way and highly desirable to be consuming information in different points in time. So is 3D, so is virtual reality in the experience. We have examples, too, of mock-ups that we've made that cost many millions of dollars by the time they're all done, at least several of which could have been done virtually in advance if we had the model to work with. And I think that's really the main point about the future of design, from my perspective, is connecting it with that constructability so that what we actually have is something that we can build from, and something that we can, throughout the life cycle of the process, rely on and then add more and more information to, such as how long does it take to do that, how much does it cost to do that, to be able to integrate those things together. So we have a plan and control process that we run, and it's using the BIM technologies, of course, but essentially the two main additions to just the technology are lean practices, where we go and we look at, using Last Planner, what is it that needs to be decided by when in order for things to progress, and de-risk up front the purchasing or the buyout that happens with our trade partners. Number two is to get a standard way to talk about measuring exactly where we are. So you can't manage what you don't measure. What do 80% CDs actually look like? They're a contractual component, yes, but from a builder's perspective, what does 80% CDs mean when I'm going to go buy out a trade partner? So the idea here is to look at it and say, that LOD, the level of development developed by the BIM forum, the standards that have been developed there, are actually things that you can measure where you are in the model creation or in the design creation phase, right? And so as we're working with the owners and with the architects, the first thing we would do is look and say, what systems decisions are dependent upon each other? What is the longest pole in the tent in terms of lead time to stay on schedule? Therefore, what decisions do we need to have made? And how do we get all of the related components determined as close as possible to that LOD 300? And we sort of compromise on that a little bit and say LOD 290 because we don't need sort of official final placement of everything in order to be buying out the subs and reducing what those allowances and holds need to be. So the closer we can work with the architect to be able to get all of that information, that's answering the constructability question, which allows us to de-risk essentially, first of all, the structural piece of that. And then once we have the design locked in, inside all of our exhibits with our trade partners, we set the expectation that we are going to get models delivered at LOD 350, which allows us then to be doing the coordination and coordinating the layout across all of the different systems that are dependent upon, again, when we need those answers, so that we can send the project teams in to be able to do the work in such a way that they don't have a lot of open-ended questions or have to do a lot of rework along the way. So it's actually using things like the pull planning, which is either stickies or technologies, which you see up there. It's actually looking at breaking out the different phases of the project, from the structure to the systems to the finishes, and saying we don't need to have a perfectly conceived 3D model for the entire building before we begin development. We have to have all of the answers we need to stay ahead of the construction cycle in order for us to de-risk and maintain flow on the projects. So again, it's just really the principles coming from Lean brought into the construction space that are around process as much as technology. The technology is required because you couldn't document or move through the process as quickly if it wasn't there, but one of our big areas of focus was to say, not so much what's the perfect technology, but what's the right technology to integrate in with our process and be able to move it through the life cycle. And so what that lets us do then, because we would ultimately be looking to generate the layout drawings from the model because of what we've implemented. And by the way, we're not taking away the architect's responsibilities in this or overstepping in terms of those accountabilities. What we're doing is we're working the process to get those questions answered. We're bundling up those changes. We're issuing an RFI and a new set of drawings, and then having the architects sign off on what it is that we actually are going to build to make sure the design intent is there and carried through the construction process. And then what that lets us do, though, is start to feed a lot of the downstream quality technologies that exist to be able to make sure that layouts are in the right place, that the work is being done correctly, that the logistics and the deliveries are scheduled and sequenced correctly. All of the things that go from what Lieutenant Governor Duncan said, turning the idea into reality, that's essentially the bridge, turning the design into the building that we're going through as well. And focusing on being able to measure quality off of digital information that you know is consistent with what's being represented to the teams that are actually doing the building is super important, because then you know you're all reading out of the same playbook. And I guess that was my last slide. I didn't realize that. I thought I had one more. It was a great slide. So again, the real key for us is to say we've got more and more complex buildings that are being envisioned. And we like the notion of having that bespoke building, but the construction constructs or the components that turn the design into something that is constructible are things that we can put process around. And by working collaboratively with the owner, the architect, and with the trade partners, we're able to be able to de-risk the projects and just maintain that flow.
Thank you. So we have a few minutes. We have about 5 minutes, so if anybody has any questions, feel free to raise your hand for any one of the panelists. Okay, we have a question already. All right, go ahead.
I'll take it, sure. So no, the answer is no, we've never taken outside money. We, about 3 years ago, honestly, hired an outside source to help us come up with a real business plan. I will tell you that I seem to be like, going against my own profession here, but architects aren't necessarily great business people. So recognizing that, we brought in a business consultant and we came up with a real business plan. And part of our business plan was to allocate sources for an R&D lab and to certain people. So we've basically taken chunks off of our profitability to put back into the firm to ultimately do that. And in the end, we gave that room or that lab or that process, we gave it a goal, a financial goal, that it had to make $1 million by the year 2020. So we're able to go out and actually pitch the services almost separately from the architecture services that we normally do. And as a result, it's pretty close to making that. We've 3D printed things for fees. We've done other types of experience driven in VR for fees. But the most important part is we've integrated it into everything that we do. So now, while the R&D capital up front was expensive and didn't really have an ROI, now it's part of the process, and every designer is working in that process, and every project manager staffs their projects accordingly. And quite frankly, it's also become a marketing thing for us too, where we've been able to go out and win jobs probably because of what we've been able to do and show clients what they could save.
Yeah, I want to add on to that as well. So from our perspective at JB&B, I don't know if I go too far into it, but Mike Taglione, sitting over here, is the founder of Thrux, and he was at one time a JB&B employee and was just frustrated with the tools that we had. And the firm kind of supported an initial effort to develop new tools, which ended up leading into Thrux, which is what Haley presented. And that originally was similar to what Christian just said. Well, for us it was about, what is this going to look like in terms of bottom line efficiency improvements in our own practice? What's it going to mean for us? What kind of competitive advantage are we going to have against other engineers in the same space? And it made sense, and that continues to be a driving factor. But to Christian's point, it's been an opportunity for us to differentiate in other ways, in terms of Thrux and what it's doing with our clients, and sort of differentiation about quality, about how we can deliver drawings that are better with the data embedded. So I think it's a multi-pronged approach. I mean, I know the leadership of our firm is really on board with the idea of the future and about getting engaged with technology as much as possible and wherever we can, and just like Christian said, diverting a portion of our revenue to that effort, and everybody's on board with it.
What helped us, so we're a little over $4 billion, and we're privately held, and we're in across the entire U.S. in 10 different offices. And so how do you source ideas from all of those different jobs and bring them together? And so putting some structure and some framework around that was really helpful. We settled on really measurements of value, which are in this order: safety, quality, performance, and customer experience. And the key is to be able to point to where you're having the impact and make sure that that's the sequence in which you're making decisions, right? You don't want to prioritize performance over quality or quality over safety, for instance, when you're working through that chain. But then having this ability to be able to generate ideas, evaluate those as experiments, promote those into pilots, and then look to scale those as on a broader level is pretty well tested or structured within, say, the software development space as well, or the product space. And so there are models out there that have this phase gate system where you essentially can invest a minimal amount of money to see if an idea has enough potential, and then move it through that chain and be more rigorous before more money gets invested against it. So we use that process within our smart labs, which we have in all of our offices as well, which are connected back into operations, because ultimately that's the closest point to the customer and where the value gets created.
I think we probably have time for one more question if somebody has anything. Anybody back there?
How many years until your respective industry is 50% automated?
Where's the crystal ball, right? Yeah. Our respective industry, meaning all of us up here? Yep. So this was talked about a little bit yesterday about sort of the difficult task of really innovating in the construction space because it's so multifaceted with all these tentacles. I tend to agree with what was said by KP yesterday, that I think it's a long time till there's some real groundbreaking change. And a lot of the reasons come down to, personal interests, resistance of folks. So, every one of us up here represents a different contract arrangement with the owner. We have our own interests as to, our bottom lines, and there isn't a lot of incentive for us to collaborate effectively yet, just based on the way these systems are set up. And what Chris mentioned about doing some work in the design phase to pull things together, and what Haley's talking about with creating, funneling this data into the construction process. Like, we're trying to get there, but it's going to require some major changes in the way that contracts are written in order to really innovate the heck out of it, I think. We good? Okay. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate it. Thank you.